Michael Miller es un profesor de filosofía del Acton Institute que ha dedicado su vida a investigar cómo combatir la pobreza. Estuvo en Guatemala para colaborar con el Instituto Fe y Libertad. Aquí te compartimos 5 puntos que, según Miller, debes entender si quieres ser parte de quienes buscan aliviar la pobreza para siempre.
So I think that we do have a moral obligation, yes. And so, say in the Christian tradition, one of the James in the Epistle of James, the letter of James, says pure religion is to care for the widow and the orphan in their distress, and then keep oneself unstained from the world. So I think each of us has a call to help the poor. And so the question then is, how do we help the poor? But I think there are better ways to help the poor and worse ways to help the poor. And sometimes we have to be careful that in our desire to help, we don't actually make the situation worse for poor people. When there's a natural disaster or if people are starving, we must come in and help immediately. But the problem is, most people are poor not because they're in an emergency situation. They're in a situation of chronic poverty. So an emergency response is not the right answer, right? So if you look around, say Guatemala or Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, where there's poverty, the main reason that people are poor is not because they lack material goods. The main reason people are poor is because they lack access to justice. They lack access to the institutions of justice, like clear title to their land, to be able to own their own property, to be able to get the court cases heard, to be able to register their business in the formal economy without having to spend thousands of dollars or hire a lawyer that they can't afford, and then be able to buy and sell their goods. So too often, I think the way we help the poor is we give things, and in giving things, we actually undermine their ability to create prosperity themselves. So, again, when there's an emergency situation, you need help right away. But when there's a chronic situation, we have to ask ourselves, why are these poor people being excluded? And how can we get them in? We have to have a heart for the poor, but we also need a mind for the poor. We can't simply just feel our feelings on behalf of poor people. We have to actually treat poor people not as objects of our charity, not as objects of our pity, but we have to treat poor people as protagonists of their own story of development. State has a really important role in helping secure title and protecting title, having justice and rule of law, and protecting, of creating security, so there's safety, so that people can work without threat of violence, and then creating the conditions like infrastructure and other things. So these things, this is the role of the state. I think where the role of the state is not the case is it's not the state's way to try to create prosperity and wealth, because the state really can't do that. You need entrepreneurs and business people to be able to create prosperity, but the state creates the conditions of justice where people can actually run their businesses and take care of their families. So I think sometimes we look at it as it's either the state or the market, right? But I would say it's a combination of the state having a limited role, the market having a role to where people can create prosperity, and then not just the state and the market, but the importance of a family, the importance of the church, and the importance of other civil associations. And these 3 parts of the state, the market, and then family, church, civil associations, all 3 of these together is what creates the conditions for prosperity and for human flourishing.
Oftentimes, say, foreign aid will come in, and instead of it actually helping the poor, it ends subsidizing corruption, and it actually ends up creating incentives for the government not to build sewage and water and infrastructure. Why? Because if you build sewage, infrastructure, and water, you start having a more active commercial populace, and then you have relationship with the people, right? But it's much easier sometimes for politicians to have the relationship with the donors and the consultants than it is to actually listen to their people. And so we have to make sure that the government actually has the responsibility to create institutions of justice, and that so-called foreign aid or help doesn't actually subsidize big corporations or corrupt politicians, but actually helps the poor.
People will say, if we had healthcare and infrastructure and education, people will flourish. Now that's partially true. Okay, but ask yourself this question. We're highly educated because you got good education. There's good roads and there's good healthcare. And you're poor, but you're healthy, educated, and there's good roads. But you don't have clear title to your land. You don't know who owns it. You can't buy a piece of property and make sure it's clear. It could be stolen from you. And you couldn't go to the court and get your court case heard. The person who stole it from you's brother-in-law is the judge. Okay? There's corruption. The company that stole it from you is friends with the guys on the board. And okay? All the corruption going on. All right? You can't register your business in the government. You can't go to the economy and say, I want to start my business. Here's the thing. It takes you 10 months and it costs you a whole year's of salary. So ask yourself this question. You're healthy, there's good roads, and you're educated. But you can't get title to your land, you can't participate in the formal economy, you can't register your business, and you don't trust the court system. You're either going to do one of three things. You're either going to migrate, you're going to despair, or if you can, you're going to join the political crony class. Right? So healthcare, education, and infrastructure are important, but they're not enough. The more foundational questions are the inclusive institutions of justice. And this is why there's migration, and this is why there's corruption.